The other thing I just want to gauge before I get underway is we all come today to learn about birds, farmland birds in particular, but I just want to know what your knowledge is. If you had to score yourself out of 10. Okay. Don't be modest. I just want to know if we've got some 8s and 9s or whether we've got your 1s or 2s. So be honest. Just have a quick skip round. It just gives me an idea. 2, 3. Love it. 7. 2. 2.5.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah, another 3 here.
I'll go for 6.
Oh, well done.
What about 2.5?
Yeah. Bit loud.
Visual and 2 for calls.
And at the back? Yeah. That's good. It just gives a nice range. So, listen, the reason I did that is if you're the 6s and 7s, you've got reasonable knowledge, chip in. Because it's lovely if I can go away having learned something as well. And for the 1s and the 2s amongst you, listen, we're here to learn. Don't be frightened to ask questions, yeah? Just if everybody else in the room knows it and they won't, it doesn't matter. If you go away thinking, oh, we should ask that question, ask. Okay, that's what we're all here for. So, let's get on with this then. I always think that it's important to know why farmland birds are not doing very well. Okay, because if you've just read the State of Nature report, okay, it says about farmland, it says about birds in general, but it picks on farmland birds and says that they are the group that are doing the worst. So why? Because we can't really do much about them. It's fine identifying them, but also we want to try and get them back. And as we have quite a few farmers and people who are managing land here, we can all do a little bit to try and get them back. So, okay, over to you. You're not going to sit here and listen to me all day. Why do you think they are not doing so well? Just chuck out a few suggestions. And I'm talking about since the 50s.
Intensive farming.
Sorry?
Intensive farming.
Intensive farming. Obviously, that encompasses a lot. Don't think I'm going to start having a go at farmers. I actually trained originally as an agronomist. Okay, so if anyone's guilty around here, it's me. So yes, intensive farming. Can you elaborate on that a bit? That's a big statement. I mean, what in particular have farmers done that may have affected birds?
Well, taking out hedgerows.
Taking out hedgerows. So there's one.
Yeah.
In the past, we were pretty hedged, quite small fields, and as machinery grew, we needed to take some hedges out. Do we still take hedges out?
Put it back in, aren't we?
Putting them back in again. Yeah. Absolutely. So we were paid to take them out, and now we've been paid to put them back in again. So yeah, I mean, you still hear about hedgerow loss, but it tends to be supermarkets, road building, all of the house projects, but also neglect. Sometimes a hedge is classified as a hedge, and then because it's not managed, you've got some of the old thorns falling over. They get so gappy that actually it's not then classified as a hedge when they next come back and survey it. So it goes down as a lost hedge. It's still there, it's just not classified as a hedge. So farmers are not to blame for that anymore. In fact, they're putting them back in again. So what other habitats have gone?
Food chain, pesticides.
Pesticides, yes. Pesticides being that top word for all of them. So like apples, and then you've got all the different Braeburns and Coxes and things. Pesticides, you get it wrong in Farmers Weekly all the time. Pesticides is the collective name for everything. Okay. So then you have insecticides, herbicides, fungicides. Sorry, the farmers amongst you, I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but it's quite important, And yeah, one of the worst things actually was herbicides. When we used to grow wheat, cereals, or any crops, arable crops, they were full of weeds. They were very colourful. Cornflowers, corn marigolds, corn poppy, all the corn you can see, all these. And they would be very, very attractive, to wildlife. Really amazing habitats. You walk into a wheat field now and it is wheat. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get wheat because all these other things are taking our nitrogen and fighting for space and moisture and everything else. So we want a monoculture. But to the birds, the insects all came in on those weeds. So that's where they went and got insects for their chicks. But also come the winter, when the stubbles are left, we've just got a bit of volunteer growing cereals now. There's no weeds in there, and of course they were all on the weed seed. So actually herbicides have been hugely impacting on those. And the first herbicide, still around, 2,4-D, which was widely used, it was about 1954-55 that came out. So it's pretty recent when you think of all the farming that went on before that. So they had a fantastic habitat. Crops were amazing habitats. So you're right. And then, of course, insecticides. If there are any insects left, we get aphids coming on the top, and we sprayed those off as well. So the poor birds, really it was hard for them, and still is. But listen, we can, as you will see later on, we can farm intensively, but have the wildlife too, and I'll show you how hopefully we can have that. Any other things that we've done?
We've mentioned lots of food resource, really.
Yes, all the way around. I mean, and actually you can bring that into farmyards too. You think now we have to have a grain store completely sealed. Nothing can get in. When I was a nipper, you'd walk past the grain store with the door open, there'd be a whoosh of birds came out, and we all survived, didn't we? But anyway, so that's, and then of course we had a lot of cattle, and all of those cattle were fed out of doors. Not many were kept indoors, and so again, even if it was hay, there was hay, grass seed falling, and then they perhaps given some nuts or whatever, the ewes coming into breeding were given top up, and all the birds gathered around those. So we've become very, very tidy. Yeah. What else? Anything else?
Autumn planting.
Autumn planting, yes, good one. So often in the past, it was very mixed cropping and with stock, so we had mixed farming, so often grass rotations went round, but also we had lots of spring cropping. And so spring cereals. Now that meant the stubbles could be there over the winter, but also the spring crops tend to have far less inputs. So they tend to be slightly more rich in weeds and things. And if you look at a map of, can I just take the South Downs, because we've followed that a lot. It's gone in and out of various things, but certainly from the war onwards, it moved steadily towards winter cropping. So everything went in the autumn. And of course that means the stubbles are not left. And then everything was sprayed. And then slowly the grass started to go as the stock went. So we became much more simple, if you like, farming. Many farms were just growing 3 crops, where in the past they'd have had all sorts of things going on. So we've become a bit polarised. If you go down to Devon now, it's largely grass and dairy. If you go across to Cambridgeshire, it's arable. And whereas in the past it wasn't like that, it was much more mixed. So that's another thing. Anything else?
Silage making.
Silage making. Yeah, if we then look at grass back down to Devon, I don't want to pick on Devon. It's funny, if you ask the public, if you ask the public, what do they want from farming? They will paint a picture of a little Devon farm. They want it to be family run. They want some cows. They want a little bit of arable, but not very much. And of course, they used to grow all the food to feed the cattle, a bit of feed wheat and then some fodder crops, kale and things to feed them over winter. And they want chickens in the yard. So they paint a picture of Devon. If I had to pick on a county that's lost its farmland birds more than anyone else, I'd probably pick on Devon. Because actually that mixture's gone, and they're now growing grass, and that grass is incredibly intensive. It's ryegrass, it's heavily fertilised, and they probably have 4 cuts, silage cuts in a season. And if you happen to be sitting in there as a skylark nest or whatever, or a brown hare or something like, you're munched in the silage. So it's very intensive. So it still looks pretty, Devon, but actually, farm and bird-wise, they've gone, they haven't done very well. So yeah, that's a very good one. Any others?
Draining wetland.
Do you know, I don't need to run this course, really, do I? You're absolutely answering everything I've got on the next slide. Yeah, drainage. A lot of farmland was drained. You can find very ancient old drains in them. But actually, we spend an awful lot of money getting everything, when that rain hits the ground, to get it off the field, into the ditch, into the street, into the river and out to sea. And then when we get a drought, we have hosepipe bans. But a lot of species like that wetter ground. Some common species like song thrush are shown actually to, where we've got really dry areas, they're shown to do less well than where we've got little bits that remain wet into the summer. And then, of course, birds like lapwings and other things that like some of these more boggy areas on farms. So yes, we're very dry. We're very, very dry. And I think we don't see it particularly, especially 2 or 3 years ago when we had all the flooding. But actually, that flooding is partly because we're rushing water off everywhere. So we're now doing a lot of work to slightly back up water, keep it on farms, make sure you've got plenty of organic matter in the fields and worms so it percolates down, but we don't rush it off so much. So we're doing quite a lot of research on our farm in Leicestershire. We've got 850 acre farm where we put everything into practice, and we don't want to cause flooding, we just want to hold that back. And so that actually it goes to the sea, but in a more sort of organised way, rather than just rushing off and taking the soil with it. Okay, so we're looking at all of these sorts of things. But so soil and water very much affects the condition of that, affects the wildlife you have on the farm. Anything else? You've just about done the list. I'll add one more in, just because it's controversial. I like being controversial. Predation. If you go back, things like foxes were, keepers were. Have we got any keepers in the room? before I say anything.
Yeah.
No, keepers used to be keepers, and they control things like foxes, carrion crows, magpies. Whereas now, very often they're busy rearing pheasants, and they don't do those things so much. So things like carrion crows and magpies are at all-time highs. You know, if you look at BTO charts, you know they've gone up and up and up, and they're really doing very well. And of course, they predate nests and eggs. I'm not saying that the decline of farmland birds is down to predation. What we're saying is with certain species, we think that they're having an impact. If I had to pick on one, I'd pick on the ground nesters. So I'd pick on something like lapwings. We're doing a lot of work on lapwings at the moment. And we're showing that you can put everything in for them, track the lapwings in, and yet they're not actually reaching the levels whereby they're producing enough chicks to keep going. And we think it's simply because foxes, carrion crows are mopping up either the eggs or the young. And so we're doing some experimental work on that to try and see if that is the thing. And it may be that in future, for stewardship schemes, targeted lapwings, that actually control of things like carrion crows might be part of that stewardship scheme. It's back to this biodiversity and us being involved. You know, we unbalance things, and perhaps it's up to us to balance them back up again.
Shoot a few badgers.
No, I wasn't going to. The B words come up, badgers. Do you know, we have the GWCT, we've got some other advisors, and we have little bets, little quiet bets, that when you run an event, we have times, it's okay, and we'll allocate, we'll all put a quid in the thing and say, how long is it into the talk before badgers are mentioned? So whoever was about between 5 and 10 minutes would have just won. So I'm not going there. It is an issue.
A badger's just a black and white fox.
Yeah, I think there is a little difference. The trouble is there's so many of them that they're working everything over. That's the trouble. Badgers' motto is if you can swallow it, you can eat it. And they will hunt out everything, okay? But they bumble along. Foxes, on the other hand, are a superb predator. They've got fantastic noses, and they will actively go and hunt nesting species. So there is a difference. And so every time we're monitoring predation, foxes actually come out right up here, up the top. And badgers, the more you've got, the more likelihood you are to come across the nest. So but there is a bit of a difference. So, look guys, you did it. Fantastic. You didn't get climate change, but hey, we'll cover that in a minute. Intensification of agriculture. You'd seen my slide, obviously. How brilliant. Pesticide, yeah, winter cropping, also block cropping. You know, we can stand on a hill and the whole thing's yellow with oilseed rape. Okay, now, you might like oilseed rape. Some birds love it. Reed buntings love nesting in oilseed rape. Song thrush quite like it. But the following year, it's winter wheat. And you don't like winter wheat when you're surrounded by it. So, you know, that's the trouble. So that can cause a problem. Loss of mixed farming, drainage you got, loss of habitat, yeah. Hedges, ponds, you know, a lot of ponds. Why did we have ponds in the past? Were they important to farmers in the past? Watering stock. And one particular bit of stock, actually, horses. Because before we had mechanisation, obviously horses were doing the cultivation and doing a lot of the work on the farm. Do you know roughly how many plough horses there were in the country, if I can call them that? I'm not talking about shy horses, things that call them plough. Roughly 1 million. Absolutely right. About 1 million horses. And of course, when he stopped to have his ploughman's lunch, he went across and let the horse have a drink out of the pond. And that's why ponds are very often in the corners of fields. So wherever you were, you had access to that pond. Horses went, you didn't really need the pond. So we'd chuck all the rubble in it. Use it as a pit, get rid of it, and that's the way they went. Again, ponds are now being put back in, so they're actually on the increase again, which is good. Increase in predators, climate change. Don't really know a huge amount. We're winning some species, so things like Chetty's warbler, little egrets you see around, and there are species coming in because of that. But also we may be losing them at the top of the country. Where anybody think of a species we might lose?
Isn't there a seabird that's decreasing in quite a big number? I can't remember.
Yeah, you're right. Many of the seabird colonies are not doing well because the sea's warming up, so the food sources are changing. They may not be depleting, but they're changing in their thing. So yes, you're quite right. But there's one bird that lives up on the mountain, thanks to ptarmigan. Yeah, lives right up on the top, turns white in the summer. If you don't get snow in the winter, if you don't get snow, it's not a good idea being white, really. But also, they may just be pushed off, literally, and we may lose them if we still get climate change. So there's pluses and there's minuses. But part of what we're doing with these groups of farmers is all working together is linking habitats so that wildlife is more able to be mobile. So as it warms up, if you don't like that, you can slowly, as a species, move northwards because things are linked. Now, if you're a bird, you can fly, but if you're something that runs along or crawls, then you need habitats to be linked. And that's one of the things that climate change, through this working on a landscape scale with farmers, is trying to address. But we've got a lot more to learn about that, really. Okay. So what can we do for birds? Well, I'm going to break it down into sort of three, really, and I'm thinking about them all year round. I'm going to look at what we can do for their nesting sites, then what we can do, because most of the farmland birds feed their chicks on insects. The one that doesn't really do that is turtle dove, but all the others are really looking at insects. And then also we need to think about them this time of year, particularly this time of year. January, February, March, and into April is a particularly lean time. So that's what I want to do for individual species, but note that it's not the same for every species. Some overlap, but you may have to do certain specific things for some of the species. So I'm going to start. What I want to do is just run through a little bit of some of these species. By the way, we'll stop after about 3/4 of an hour now, and then we can have another cup of coffee and a pee break. So these grey partridge redlegs. This is the indigenous species that we have here, the grey partridge. One of the fastest declining species. We know exactly how to get it back. We've got projects where they are absolutely thriving, doing fantastically well. But it's not across the whole country. That's the trouble. If you measure the whole country, they're not declining as fast as they were. They're beginning to plateau out, but they're in trouble. They have this lovely, great plumage. They have lovely heart shape on here, and the male in particular almost looks like it's been messing around with mum's eye makeup. They really do. They're lovely little red things, and then this lovely grey bit, and then the brown on the back. Fabulous, fabulous birds. Probably the best parent in the bird world. He is every bit as important as she is. They're very much a modern marriage, a modern pair. So he will, make sure that she's okay on the nest. When she comes off, he'll let her feed, and he does all the looking. You'll see them. She's got her head down feeding, and he's watching for raptors or predators, the whole time. And then when the chicks come out, they do this amazing thing that I've had it done to me, and if you come across them with little chicks, you'll see it often, is that they think you're a predator. I could be a fox. So what he will do is he'll put a wing down and flap about as though I'm injured, and it's right in front of you. It's very obvious. And so the predator thinks, wow, easy catch, he's injured, that's a meal. So off they go, following the male. Meanwhile, the female will just sneak round the back, take all the chicks with her, and when he thinks that that he's taken this predator far enough away, he just gets up and flies away, leaving the fox going, "What? I don't believe it. I thought you were injured." And he'll then whir around and go and land and go and find the female and the chicks again. So it's a terribly brave thing to do, and they'll get really just in front of you or a fox, and keep flapping this wing as though it's broken. So fantastic parents, and they also, I always used to say, they lay more eggs than any other species in the world. And I've said that for a number of years, so it just shows, don't always listen to what I say, because actually I've discovered I'm wrong. I'm only partly wrong, because they lay more eggs than any other species that they then go on to look after in their own nest. But I found out actually that a cuckoo can lay up to 25 eggs in a season. But of course they lay one in everybody else's nest, meadow pipits or sedge warblers or reed warblers or something like that. These guys can lay up to about 21 eggs and raise that lot themselves. He and she will raise that. So amazing. Really lovely. Then we come to the gaudy foreigner, the red leg or French partridge, which is an introduced species. They come from the Med, Spain, places like that, where they're really quite common. And you can see, really quite gaudy. It's just, I don't know, they're just gaudy. They're nothing as like as ours, nothing like as nice as ours. I'll play both the calls in a minute, and even our call, neither have got great calls, but that's a fab bird, this is a okay bird. One of the other things you'll do is when you come across them, the grey partridges sink and... Yeah,
after Brexit, will this be around here?
No.
You're not the first person who's asked that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Send them all packing. If you come across them, the grey partridge will be hidden and they just sink down. So when you walk into a field, if you're doing a bird survey and you walk into a field, grey partridge will see you come in and they'll just sink. You'll walk round the field and you probably won't see them, okay? Unless you walk across the field and flush them. And then they suddenly get up, make you jump, and they'll all go whirring away. These guys you probably will see, because you'll see them running down the hedgerow in front of you, because, as you know, the French run away. So they are quite different on that format. So it's very interesting. We had, in Kent, we knew a farm that had the highest population of grey partridge on any farm in Kent. And they had, I think it was Kent Wildlife Trust, don't quote me on that because it might not be, but a whole pile of people, volunteers, came onto this farm and they spent the day there monitoring it, okay? And they wrote down all the birds and the flowers and everything else, and a fabulous day. And when we looked at the list at the end, they didn't have grey partridge on it, okay? Because of this sinking down. Okay, so they'd completely missed it. How we count grey partridge is in a vehicle. So we do it separately to other bird surveys. We get in the morning, we jump on a Land Rover when the crops have been taken off, and we'll drive across the stubbles. And they're quite used to tractors and farm vehicles, and they'll just sit there, and then you can count them all. Okay, but the moment you stop the vehicle and open the door, they'll sink down or fly away, so you don't get to see them. So let's just play. I hope this works. We were trying to get it on the speakers up here, but I'll play you the songs and hope you can all hear them. Not the most exciting call. I think they do make other calls when they fly, but that's the one you often hear. But that may sound boring, but when you actually stand in sort of high Norfolk, as I call it, on some of the estates up there, and in the evenings you hear that coming from all over the farmland, it's actually really it's a lovely sound, it's quite evocative. And it's just gone missing from most of the country now. And then we've got the redlegs. You've probably all heard that. Okay, that's enough, mate, I think. Right, we'll go on to the next one. So a little bit about what we do for partridges, and I'm really aiming this at grey partridge. Redlegs will nest here and they'll raise chicks here. In fact, way up into Scotland, there's actually quite a good wild population up in Angus and Perthshire of red-legged partridges, and you think, gosh, all the way from Spain up to there, but actually they're doing quite well. So what do we want for grey partridges in particular? What we want, actually, they're a bird of the open. Now, this is very open, I know, but so they don't like woods and they don't like being enclosed. So small fields with lots of trees around them isn't really grey partridge country. They like much more open, big, expansive. I'm not saying you won't get them there, but it's not their optimal habitat is these big open areas. This is a picture I took up in top of Norfolk. Now notice there's no trees in the hedges even. Now if you had the odd tree it doesn't matter, but the grey partridge wouldn't nest next to the tree because predators sit in them, crows and raptors and things. So they tend to avoid them. They'll even avoid things like telegraph poles and pylons too. So that for them is a perfect hedge. Now, whereabouts do they nest? They don't nest in the hedge, they nest on the ground, and they love these field margins. They'll nest out on beetle banks. I'll show you some beetle banks later on, which is this out in the middle of the field. But that's what they're looking for, and they love old dead tussocky grass that hasn't been trimmed from the year before. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, and yeah, come on in. Hi, come on in. No, no problem. Come and have a seat. There's a coffee at the back if you want one. Okay. So yeah, they love tussocky grasses, not cut. And when you think about both the partridge and actually hen pheasants, you think of the colour of them, and you get in amongst the tussocky grass that's been uncut. You're beautifully camouflaged and hidden under there. If you've trimmed it all and it's the colour of this table and about as tall as this table, you stick out like a sore thumb. You're going to get spotted by someone. So it's actually stopping people being too tidy. It's actually stopping you from cutting things. So sometimes it's not doing something that's quite good for wildlife. So I'm not saying you don't cut the hedge. You cut it on a rotation so that you get blossom and berries, okay, because most shrubby species flower in their second or third years. But you don't necessarily have to cut this. Cut it only if you've got lots of brambles and the hedge is growing out. So you might cut this, I don't know, once every 5 or 6 years. And then you don't do it everywhere. You just do this hedge and the other hedges you leave. So you're doing them on a rotation, so there's always some nice tussocky grass, okay? What else is this? Forget birds for a minute. Well, other things will nest in there. Yellowhammers like nesting in it. There's other species too. But what else is this good for? I mean, you can see that it's quite good for nectar.
Yeah.
So that sort of stuff.
And stuff.
Voles, yeah, absolutely. So this will fill up with voles. And so therefore your kestrels and your barn owls and everybody else will go along there and hunt that. And they, again, funnily enough, especially barn owls like open country to go and nest in. They compete with tawny owls, which tend to be in the woodlands. So again, this is great for them. You'll see them hunting these. What else? If we said to you butterflies, okay, you've got a hedge and you've got grass. I know you're all on a bird ID day, but you can't just do birds. We're on to do a little bit on butterflies. Tell me some butterflies that nest on the hedge species. When I nest on the hedge species. Caterpillars feed on hedge species. Can you name me any? Come on, the ecologists. Brown hair streak. Cracking answer, yeah. Brown hair streak feeds on blackthorn. Okay? Blackthorn hedgerow species. So that's great. Holly blue. Yeah, they feed on holly but also ivy. So that's another good one. So that's 2.
Speckled wood?
No.
Sounds like it should do.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. No. Brimstones. Yeah, brilliant. Buckthorn. That's the brimstone's the lovely yellow butterfly. If it's a male, it's very yellow. The female's a bit more lemony coloured. About the first butterfly you usually see, and you can literally see it from now on if you got. But if you get a lovely summer's day, lovely spring sunshine, then they'll be about the first one you see. Yeah. But after that, you begin to struggle. So nearly all the other butterflies are actually associated with grasses or flower species. So this is very important to them. So for instance, all the brown family, so meadow browns and gatekeepers and all of that lot, they all feed on grasses. So they're all in here. Okay. The other thing just to think about, here's a little thought for you. At what stage, what's the date today? 25th? Is it? What stage are butterflies at today? Right? Are they at the egg stage, the caterpillar stage, the chrysalis stage, or adult stage? Now, I'll give you a clue. There's some species that are actually at all those stages, okay? But which has got the most butterfly species at which stage on the 25th of things? So I'm going to ask you to vote, okay? Who's going to vote for egg? About 4, okay? Well, who's going to vote for caterpillar? 1. Who's going to vote for chrysalis? Oh, quite a big vote here. Great. And what about adult? Okay, no votes for adult. Some do, as you know. You sometimes get small tortoiseshell in your bedroom, and you spare bedroom, you turn the heating on because people coming in, suddenly got a butterfly charging around the place. So as I say, some are upset. The person who at the back who said caterpillar is correct. By far the most butterflies are at the caterpillar stage. I know, isn't it unlikely? And where are they overwintering? They're overwintering in the tussocks. We're back to uncut grass. So what they do, you've got a tussock of grass with the stalks out the top, and they go right down, little tiny caterpillars go right down into the bottom of the tussock. And that's where they overwinter. So if you've come and cut it all, they're stuffed really, you've either mashed them up, or they get predated because you've taken their big warm blanket away from them. Okay, so on a day like this, they're all tucked down in there, along with many, many beneficial species of insect, which is what these birds all feed on. Okay, so if you take a metre square and you look in that, how many insects? Very often we're getting up to 1,500 insects per square metre of tussocky stuff. So huge numbers. Don't always trust scientists. I'm not a scientist. I'm a sort of advisory sort of person, but I have to listen to them and take their advice out. Wasn't too sure about this, so I went and dug a tussock up, and I brought it in, and I put it. Luckily, I have an auger at home, and I shoved it on the auger just to see what. Well, I tell you, my children said, "Oh, for God's sake, why can't we have a normal father?" You would not believe what came out of that tussock. And they were all over the kitchen, climbing up the walls and flying around the house. So I tell you, just sometimes you have to believe scientists. So amazing habitat. And the way you manage it, cut grass is a very different habitat to uncut grass. So remember that. So if you can actually cut half and leave half, then that's absolutely brilliant. So then the partridges have nested in their tussocky grass, and they now take their little tiny bumblebee-sized chicks out, and they need insects. Okay. Now remember, she can eat weed seeds and all sorts of things, but those chicks have to have those little insects, protein-rich. We've actually taken. It sounds a bit cruel, but I haven't got the photograph here. We took some chicks and we fed them on protein, but not insects. Okay, and then we fed others on insects, and we monitored them growing. Now they grew size-wise actually at a very similar rate, but when you then looked at how they feathered up, the one that was given the insect-rich diet produced great feathers, so much better than the one that was getting less protein and certainly not from insects. So then you add bad weather, rainfall or a bit of chill. Those that have been fed the insects were so much more robust and surviving. So that's what we're doing here. This is now a strip. Look at that cracking crop of winter barley. I'd be very proud of that. Down the side here, here's your nice nesting habitat. And what we've done is just simply put a strip of insect-rich habitat. It can be just a cereal strip that you then don't fertilise. You leave and let all the weeds come up, and that will bring in lots of insects. This guy adds a little bit of Phacelia. Now, some of the specialists might go, "Oh, it's a foreign plant," but it's very, very good for bringing in things like, all sorts of insects, but things like hoverflies and stuff like that, which then go and munch the aphids in there. And because it's on arable land, does it really matter? Because we can spray it out, we can cultivate it, and who's saying that barley is particularly natural? So, we're bringing in all sorts of things on arable land. Where I don't like to see this is where we're bringing in things on permanent ground, where you've got perennial species, and then I think we need to really try and source local provenance and everything else. Also, we know how to get rid of this. It's very easy to get rid of. He puts it in largely for PR, interestingly, when I asked him. apparently he goes in the pub and everyone goes, "Oh, we've seen all your lovely flowery margins coming out. Aren't they amazing?" And he said, "It's great. I walk in the pub now and hold my head high." So that's why he was doing it. So there's all sorts of reasons why farmers do stuff. But to me, I love it because I love to see a good crop, well grown, and also the wildlife habitats in. So he does it all brilliantly. You know, you've got to be quite organised. He does it very well. The other thing you could do, and these are all options that are paid for or can be paid for if you go into stewardship schemes. This is a farm, again, this is later on in the season, good crop of barley, very clean, and nothing much in there at all. But here he's just cultivated the edge, not planted anything, and allowed whatever comes up, okay? And this is actually done for some of the rare arable flora that I was talking about that used to exist in the fields before. So there's poppies and all sorts of things. I actually went down here and found some quite nice, relatively rare plants, things like some of the fluellins and some of those other species that are around here. But of course that's insect rich too. So again, if she's nested up in these bits here, that's lots of food. And it's not just partridges, all the other birds are coming in and gathering up insects too.
So tell me, why doesn't this lucky farmer get stinging nettles, thistles, and all those other nice broccoli?
And he might well do that. That happens to be a quite clean one. I agree with
How does he
you.
manage it?
If he did that for 2 or 3 years in the same place, I'm sure they would come up. And of course, this is what they call boys' ground, light ground. Now I know that you're on much heavier ground here, so you're on clay. So it's much. Our farm in Leicestershire's on clay. So we're very, I'm with you on that one. Remembering that thistles can be actually a fantastic nectar plant.
Yes, I must admit, I thought the previous slide was thistles, and I was about to have a go at you, but clearly it wasn't.
It's interesting, there's a girl doing research at Reading University, and she's looking at what bumblebees nectar on. She's going to come up with the top list.
I'm sure thistles will be right at the top.
It is number one.
But also you're supposed to get rid of the
Spear thistle, I know, it's a notifiable weed.
Exactly.
So there we have a bit of a juggle. Yeah, I think everything in moderation. We're back to biodiversity and us managing things. So yes, and some people will put up with more thistles than other people. But yes, it's keeping things at a level. And good rotations. Remember, spear thistle, for instance, is a biennial. So in year 1, it's not doing anything. In year 2, it's flowering. So again, if you creeping thistle's worse. Yeah. So it's then making sure that people understand which thistle they're dealing with, because I'm sure you all know your thistles. But actually, when I quiz farmers, okay, what's this thistle? Well, no, it's a bloody thistle. Why do I need to know? Well, actually, because some, yes, like your creeping thistle, are not good for arable farming, okay? But actually, spear thistle is not too much of a nuisance, and if a bit of seed blows and comes up and you think you're going to spray your field anyway. I mean, they're not too... On pasture, then spear thistles become much more of an issue. So it's quite important, and this is all back to advice. This is where, Matt comes in and the ecologists come in and Fag come in and all these other people that are giving advice. It's very important to make these things work. They're not always easy. So it's a good question. And some thistles are fine, but not too many of them. So that's another way of producing, another one that's paid for. And increasingly now what we're doing, and there's a big government push, is to get wildflowers put in. And I'm concentrating on arable here because we're still on grey partridge. That's a great splash of oxeye daisy, but later on it might be, as the oxeye daisies will go away and then it'll be all purple with knapweed and things. But actually you can do this really quite easily on farmland. People get it wrong. They buy seed, and the first thing all farmers will do, unless you tell them, is they'll drill it. Right? It's just what they do. Farmers drill things. And the last thing you want to do with wildflower seed is put it down a spout. It doesn't want to be drilled. So you get a nice seed bed, you clean it all up, make sure you don't have your docks and your thistles there, and that might take you a whole year to do out of production, yeah? Turning the soil over, or you might spray it, and you get it nice and clean, nice seed bed, and then you spread your seeds on the top, okay? And then you roll them in. Now, people say, but what about the fertiliser? It's too fertiliser rich. And yes, it may be. So you choose the right grasses, nice fine grasses, but also you choose robust species to put in. You don't pay lots of money and find little delicate wildflowers. You do things like knapweed and oxeye daisy and things like that. And, this is one that I advised on, and it's a great success. He's chuffed to bits with it. It's up in the Cotswolds, you can see the stone wall. It really is a spectacular thing. And he just cuts that once a year in the autumn, and it works a treat. And so he's very pleased with it. And again, this down here is a public footpath, and he says everybody he meets, they all stop him and say, you know, you're the farmer here. Oh, well done for doing this, and that's great because you know farming's not good at PR particularly, and so all these sort of things really help. And again, paid for under stewardship. Okay, so it's all things we can do. And as the fertility drops away in this, and it becomes a bit more open, they can take their chicks, fills up with insects. It's another way of supplying insects to farmland birds. Then what we can do is where you've actually, we're now into winter, you can actually have left your cereals in there with the Phacelia or whatever, when I was that first one with the purple out of it, combine the rest of the field, you can actually leave the strip left behind. You're paid to do that, and again, that's just cereal with weed seeds in it. What a great food source. Now again, it's not for everyone, and again, picking out some of the minuses is this sometimes can be a rat problem. So you need to think about that. And I'll mention rats, I'll come back to rats later on. But this is something that fits in with farming quite well, and quite a few people are now doing. So you just leave that strip and they'll pay you the rough equivalent of what you would have made had you harvested it. Remembering that you haven't put any inputs into that, it's just you planted it, it came up, and then you leave it, okay? Remembering also that wheat prices go up and down, so you need to look at it over a 5-year period. So at the moment, last season stewardship was paying quite well. 2 or 3 years before that, it probably wasn't actually. You would have made more out of it if you'd combined that. So it does fluctuate a bit. So you've got to take that gamble almost if you want. But also stubbles. I mentioned stubbles, but notice I've called them weedy stubbles, because normally now you go across a stubble and it's very clean. You know, I walk lots and lots of stubbles and you don't flush anything out. Go on a field like this, where actually the inputs weren't great, there were weeds left behind, took a crop off it. This is actually an old stewardship scheme where they actually paid you to lessen the inputs. But I'm just going back, that would have been a much more of an old-fashioned stubble left behind. And when I walked across this, there were clouds of linnets and goldfinch taking off, a lot of hares in here, full of meadow pipits and skylarks. This was a great habitat, and that would have been all across the country before. And now we're to these clean stubbles, and that really rams it home quite a lot when you see how good these were. And of course, you've even got things like things beginning to flower, mayweed and stuff. Come the spring, when your turtle dove comes back, in the past we were still, you know, going along with the horse or a bit behind, you know, especially on some of the heavier soils. You weren't allowed to get on in the spring, and so it was all a bit late. The turtle doves would come in on these, and they had ready seed still left in them. But also, if that didn't work, they then went around the cattle and got fed there, or into the farmyard and ate the grain there. And one of the big problems with turtle dove, we think, and I'll show you one later, is the fact that there's a lack of food when they arrive in the spring. How are we doing time-wise? We'll have a break soon. 5 minutes and we'll break. Just finish these two. Also, under greening, some of you will be in greening. Some of the larger farms will have to do greening. 5% of your farm has to go into an ecological focus area. They do come up with them, don't they? And what that means is that you actually have to do some things to score points to get your payments from government. One of them is growing cover crops. Okay, so what you can do is go out into the stubble and chuck some, I don't know, usually a brassica type thing. So it could be mustard, it could be a bit of stubble turnip, and it just provides a bit of extra cover out there. So for things like grey partridge, where you've done this, you'll tend to find that's where the grey partridge are. They'll go around there, and they're probably eating some of the greenery. If it's reasonably mild, you may have some more insect life on that, but also they're using it as extra bit of cover out there, so they'll hide in amongst it. So that can be quite useful. And of course, as far as the soil and putting organic matter in, you can do a lot of this across the field, and then when you come to cultivate it in the spring, you're adding organic matter back in. Plus it's stopping soil runoff if you get wet weather, so lots and lots of pluses. So certainly the farms that I'm going on, I ask them what they're doing with their greening, and if they've got spring crops going in, I'll say, have you considered doing some greening options on those? Because you can do an awful lot with cover crops. There's a lot of interest in those too. And then also what you can do, you're growing, sorry, yes, at the back.
I just wanted to say about brassicas. A lot of the brassica seed is treated with something that's a neonicotinoid.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not
Buy non-treated. You can get non-treated.
Yes, but is that what you were encouraging?
I would absolutely, yes, I should have mentioned it, yeah. We'll perhaps talk about neonics later on. It's quite an issue. But yes, I'd always try and, anything like this, I would try and get absolutely untreated seed, because most of it will come up, and mustard's very cheap. Don't get it coated, and of course they don't want to spend the expense if they can't charge you more. And for something as simple like this, they don't want it coated. So, but you're quite right to just check. Yeah. And then we've got wild bird seed mixtures. I've put a colourful one in there. This is quinoa. Okay. Quinoa, if you're a vegetarian. It is interesting, isn't it? Because the farmers all call it quinoa. But if you go into a health food shop and ask for quinoa, they look at you blankly, and say, "We don't have that." And I said, "Oh, do you have quinoa?" "Oh, yeah, we've got quinoa." So it's funny, they're two different languages, but very rich in protein, and along with many other seeds, we can grow these mixtures. So rather than growing food for us, human consumption, we literally grow these as a crop. We're fertilising it. We want it to seed lots, and we're having patches now specifically for farmland birds to come and feed on over winter. So that's a great option. And actually it's got even better because they've upped the price. I think it's about 650 quid now for a hectare of wild bird seed mixture. It used to be 450. Okay, you've got to go and do it, you've got to cultivate it. If you get kale in there, I'll just show you a bit of kale. The beauty of kale is that you can leave it for more than 1 year. So that suddenly makes the bottom line look a bit better. And kale like that is fantastic. It all seeds in its second year, flowers in its second year and seeds, lots of little seeds. So you've got things like linnets, goldfinch, reed bunting love it. You get a lot of species like that in it. And meanwhile, grey partridge are mucking around in underneath because they've got the cover. Also things like some of the insect eaters and worm eaters, so things like song thrush. I've actually walked right around an estate and not recorded song thrush. I then get to the kale plot, walk down it, 15, 20 song thrush in it, because it's like a little microclimate in the bottom. So in cold weather like this, they're eating slugs, snails, but I think also it's like a blanket, and you get the worms nearer the surface. So and perhaps it's also not rock hard in the frost. So absolutely will suck in song thrushes into second year kale. So that's good. So then what we try and do on the bigger plots is we say to the farmers, don't renew it all at once. So here, this is kale flowering, the yellow flowering in its second year, and here he's just renewed the middle patch. Okay, so you've always got some that's left and some that are about to be renewed, and that's a great way to rotate wild bird seed mixtures. And also you can vary what you're planting. So if you begin to get a bit of a weed problem, your thistles or docks are coming back in, you can actually put something in where you might be able to go and spray those docks out. I'm not anti taking stuff out like that. So a little bit of a product like Ally, if you all know Ally, fantastic on docks. You just spray this middle bit, and you've designed this so it's also the width of your boom. Okay, this bit in the middle, so it could be 12, 16, 18, 24 metres or whatever. So you think about how you're going to manage it, okay? And so that's another thing to encourage farmers to do. What we also know, because we've done the work with this is the last slide and then we have a break. We did a lot of work, this is quite old work now, but it's pretty appropriate. We did it with the BTO, British Trust for Ornithology, to get this into stewardship. We wanted wild bird seed mixtures in there. What we did is we went and monitored everything that people were growing and tried to determine what eats what. Okay, so this information's out there. So if you take something like one of my favourites, yellowhammer, look, they love cereals and they love millet. Okay, they absolutely love those two things. So that mix would be designed very much to have those in if you've got lots of yellowhammers. But if I then go to a little thin-billed bird like, say, goldfinch, look, cereals and millet don't come into their diet at all. Far too big. They can't cope with those seeds. They love teasel. They love, but linseed and kale, second-year kale, little tiny seeds is what they're after. So again, when we're doing that, think about what birds you've got, which is why it's great to go and have a look. See what your local birds are. You can then design your mixes to feed the birds that you've actually got. But also, you want a range in seed. You want some bigger ones for your yellowhammers, which you're probably going to have, and then you want a few little ones for things like goldfinch, which are actually doing very well out there, but for species like that. So mix and match. It's design. But remember, you're growing this as a crop. to produce lots of seed. So we want fertiliser. So the first thing I say to a farmer is treat this like a crop. Exactly as you would growing your oilseed rape or anything else. Farm it, grow it, let's have a good yield on it. And so, that's worth doing. Okay, let's have a break now, and then we'll come back and that's the habitat-y bit, if you like. We'll then concentrate on some species and hear lots more songs. Okay? Great. Should we have just 5 minutes? Is that okay? Are you from a different world to the rest of us? Which a lot of birders talk about. Starting with some common. I'm not saying that you necessarily have these, but you might do, and that's quite exciting if they turn up. But also, you're going to go to different parts. Do we know if we've ever got any tree sparrows here?
We've got a map there of sort of notable birds there.
Great.
So,
And tree sparrows are on
I
it?
think so, yeah.
Yeah. They may turn up in the winter and perhaps not breed here, I don't know.
Can we pass those around actually? Because those
That's
are
a good
red
point.
ones.
Yeah.
So, I meant to do that at the beginning.
Tree sparrows are quite interesting. Remember now that we actually think we know enough about all these birds that if you have them, we can put in the habitat for them to bring them back. The only one that we're struggling with probably is turtle dove. I still don't think we know.
Doves in this area as well.
Have you? They're one of the species that I'm not sure we know enough about.
And they're a part of the stewardship list.
Great, excellent. So, interestingly, house sparrows, we all think two a penny, they're actually now red data listed, which means that they are going down at a fast enough rate to be real cause for concern. I can go to some places where they're still very common, you can go to other places where they're not. One of the long studies on them was actually around Buckingham Palace in London, and they used to nest in the main gates as you went in, and all around, they've all gone. There's none of them. And we think there's different reasons of why they're not doing well in towns and also out in the countryside. We think in towns it's largely insects for feeding the chicks, and actually that's not necessarily an issue in the countryside because they tend to nest around farmyards and manure heaps and all this sort of thing, probably doing right. We think in the countryside it's much more an issue of winter food. So the same species but slightly different things are affecting them depending on what locality they're in. And then here's the tree sparrow, which is, again, very often a target species. Fantastic little bird, actually. I absolutely love them. You think of sparrow, but they've got this lovely chocolate brown head that actually, if you see them in half decent weather, it is very obviously chocolate. Very lovely colour, very rich. And they've got this black cheek spot on the side, which actually is, when they turn their head, is really quite obvious if you've got a half decent pair of binoculars. Notice that the house sparrow has a grey top to the head. Also, the male has this big bib, black bib on the front. Okay, the female of the house sparrow is a real LBJ. It's just brown, really. So fairly dull. Interestingly, the sexes are both alike in the tree sparrow. So the female and the male both look like that. Okay, but they're quite interesting birds. You can get these around buildings, but they're much more rural. You're more likely to find them in you might find a loose colony in some big dead trees or something on the top of pollards and are nesting there. But they will come and nest also in and around buildings, but they've declined very badly. I'll just play that. Most of you will know the house sparrow. And they'll do. Oh, I'm sorry. And they'll do that sitting where that one is on the left, and he'll sit there. They're probably nesting under the eaves, and he'll do that all day long. The tree sparrow it says the word chip all the time, and I hope it's quite difficult finding really good examples. It's a black cap singing in the background. So a real chip, 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 and you get a lot of them doing that, and they make other noises as well. Once you get to know them, there is quite a difference out in the field. I know they sound reasonably similar, but
So is the Eurasian tree sparrow the same?
Yeah.
tree sparrow?
yeah. And yeah, if you go down into, I remember being down in Gascony in southern France where they've got, both are quite common, and I was sitting in a cafe and I thought, oh, tree sparrow, and it was sitting on the eave right above me on a house, and right next to it was a house sparrow. The two were just sitting there, and they're quite common, and they were just using, tree sparrows seem to be using exactly the same habitat as house sparrows down there. Quite interesting. What we can do here is wild bird seed mixtures, stubbles, all of those sorts of things. But often what we think is out there is that there might well be a shortage of nest sites. Again, I'm back to this tidiness thing. If a tree dies, what we want to do is get the chainsaw out and take it down, chop it up into logs and bring it, that's fine. If you've got an open fire, that's great. But we are terribly tidy. We don't like to see dead trees around. Now, if it's next to a footpath, then you might need to do something about it for health and safety. But even then, you could chop the branches off and just leave the main trunk. You're a bit unlucky if the trunk falls on you, to be honest. But certainly if it's elsewhere on the farm, leave it. Dead wood is so important out there in the countryside, and so many things. I often think that a big tree, when it's died, is actually more important than when it was alive. It becomes a fantastic habitat. And woodpeckers and all sorts of things, branches fall off it, and this is what they go nest in. So you will find, some big old ash trees or something with a little colony. Meanwhile, you can actually put boxes up and they'll use them. I've put the size, 2.8 centimetre hole, and that means that they can squeeze in and out quite well. Excuse me, you don't get bigger birds taking over and stopping them using it. So that's quite a good sized hole for them. And they like to nest in loose colonies. I say loose, it's not, they're not all stuck together like house martins all in a row, but they quite like to be with, other families around. So what we tend to do, and I tend to target water, because there's a little bit that says that they quite like water, and we think it's probably because there's more insects around water. So, for instance, you're going to do them here. I haven't been out on it. You've got a lake here, yeah? And if there's some big trees, I would loosely put a few up on some of the trees there. If you're going to put them in, they like big hedges too. So if you've got big hedges with trees sticking out, put them on those trees. Put them just above the line of the hedge. Whoever that is buying pints at lunchtime. I should have said phones off. Put it just above the hedge, because what we found is when some people like to place them sort of in amongst the hedge on the tree, and they will use them, but we found the predation from weasels is far greater, because weasels will climb up hedges and go and predate nest boxes in amongst the hedge. So if you just put it up on the tree above the hedge, then the weasels can't get at it. So these we put up. This is number 23. This is our farm in Leicestershire. We had them coming in the winter, but no breeding pairs at all. We put up some boxes. This is one of 23. That's a youngster I'm looking at. And we've now got a thriving colony, which is a great news story. We had a species non-breeding, and now it's breeding on the farm. And so, that we then go and shout about, because that's farmers bringing in new species. That's it. It's great.
How many boxes would you suggest as an initial amount?
I would put 4 or 5 up in a loose group, and then obviously if they start to get used by tree sparrows, then you can increase it, or you might start another little colony somewhere else. But yeah, 4 or 5 just to kick off with. The other thing is, if you've got, where we're going this afternoon, you've got wild bird seed mixtures or set aside and other bits of seed, because of course they're seed eaters. If they're already coming into an area like that, that might be quite an appropriate place to put some boxes, because we also know that they'll roost in them in the winter. We're using some of these. You'll probably be able to tell me. We're using this thing where every time they go in and out of a hole, they get recorded. What's the term? I can't remember what it's called. I'll think of it later on. So we've rung them, and then every time they go in and out of a box, it clicks. And so it's an electrical thing. I can't remember what the technical name is. So we know which boxes have been used and when. And a lot of these boxes have got tree sparrows going in the evenings to roost in them, which is quite interesting.
Doesn't matter which way they're facing them.
Oh, good question. Yeah. If it's in under a canopy, so it's in the shade, doesn't particularly matter. But generally, as a rule, and it's quite important for things like barn owl boxes, kestrel boxes, I tend to always try and face them from sort of northeast round to southeast. A really good way. It gets the morning sun, so it warms you all up. but also you don't really get much inclement weather. Most people want to face it south, because that's where we like our houses facing. But if you're a little owlet from a barn owl sitting in June and you're covered in down and it's a hot sunny day, it gets bloody hot in that box, and it can actually, can finish them off. You've got a real heat wave. And of course, if you make them southwest, you've got all the southwesterly rain and wind coming in. So roughly east is a really nice way to face them, unless you're under, big canopy and it's all going to be shady. Good question.
What about, do you clean the boxes? I hear about people cleaning their boxes.
If it's a box like that, I do tend to go along and open them up and take the nest out. The only reason is that you get quite a lot of parasites overwintering in the thing. So they're ready there as soon as the young hatched out. So you get quite a lot of parasites in them. The classics actually there's some quite interesting ones on swifts. Little flat beetly thing. If you ever pick up a swift that's been grounded, they've got little, very, very slim black little beetle things running around them. And they all overwinter in the nests. It's a great little life cycle. And when the swifts come back, they hatch out and go on the youngsters and then go all flying. So you think of the rate a swift goes, they're going to hang on in there. But they're great. It's a great little one. But these parasites can. In barn owl boxes, I don't know, every second, third year, you need a license. Certainly during the breeding season, but if they're not using them, you can go up and just tidy them up a bit. And some don't make a mess, some do. And if you've got a lot of dung and rubbish coming in, just scrape a bit of it out. But it's quite important, I think, with some of these little nest boxes, blue tits and stuff in the garden you might have. One of my favourites, the yellowhammer. I just love yellowhammers. I just think they're great. When you get a male in full breeding plumage, they are just like a little canary sitting over. You get them in the morning sun or evening sun, they're really pretty yellow. Females yellow, but less yellow. And their song, anyone know their song, what it's meant to say? Go on.
Little bit of bread and no
Little bit of bread and no cheese. Yeah, is what it's meant to say. I'll play you in a minute, and if you can get that out of it, you're a better man than me. But yeah, exactly. But it's a nice one to learn. And the other thing about them, they're a member of the bunting family, called yellowhammer. They're very often called yellow bunting, but they also have lots of country names. Where I was brought up, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire borders, and I used to go and follow from a very young age, follow the gamekeepers around and the farm workers and everything, and just loved it all. And I remember going with one particular keeper, and he called these scribbling larks. And I thought, they're not a lark. Why does he call them a scribbling lark? And I asked him, and he said, go and find a nest, and when you found a nest with eggs in, yellowhammer, you come back and tell me why I call it a scribbling lark. So this is what they were like in those days. So I had to it took ages because they nest very low down in that tussocky grass with bits of bramble right next to the hedge, quite like ditches. Anyway, eventually I found one. And when you look at the eggs, it looks like someone scribbled all over them. Literally. Are you okay?
I've got to go off quick.
Oh no.
Back in about 45 minutes.
An incident.
Yes, unfortunately.
Never mind.
I'll be back when I can be.
Yeah.
Should be back in that.
Back for the soup.
I'll be back in an hour.
Okay. Not a problem. Yeah. The eggs literally look like someone scribbled all over them with a pencil. They've got lines all over them, so hence scribbling line. But they've got quite a lot of country names. I love country names. We've got to keep them going. This is a great song, but if you get a little bit of bread and no cheese out of it, you'll... You can get the cheese at the end.
Cheese.
A little bit of it. One more.
quite evocative, that sound.
It is. It's a great sound. I love it. They're one of my favourite birds. You can also, they will sing that sometimes on a really hot, sultry day in the middle of summer when it's all quiet, and you just have one still singing away. So they're great. Another bunting is the reed bunting. By their name, they are associated in the summer with reeds and wetlands, but also sort of scrubby ditches that have all got a bit overgrown, and they'll nest in those. The male is quite obvious. He's got this big black head, quite white. The female is same size and everything else, but unfortunately just sort of brown. She does have some black marks on her, but nothing like as much as him. And he's the most obvious. She tends to sort of not be quite as obvious. He sits up on high things. It might be on top of a reed or a bush, and sings one of the most unexciting songs you're ever going to hear. But once you've learned it, it's good. And actually, once you've learned also the contact call, which is, I haven't got on here, but when you go out, they will come from all over the wetlands. They'll come onto Farmland to feed on wild bird seed mixtures. So I found them right up on top of the Marlborough Downs, probably 2 or 3 miles from the nearest water. So water doesn't feature in the winter, and they'll come, and once they've found a good seed mixture, they can spend literally most of the winter in it. And the only way you really, when you go along, you walk along, most finches and buntings all fly out. In fact, I designed a great place to monitor up at Royston in Cambridgeshire, because there was a big field of wild bird seed mixture, and it had telegraph wires going across. So all you did is you went in and you made, come on, up you get, and they all flew up and landed on the wires, and you counted them all. So it was just really fantastic. But you wouldn't get reed buntings going up there. And when you walked along, all you'd hear, you see this little bird go back in again, but it would call every time. And once you've learnt that call in the winter, it's okay. It's just one note, so it's not really for here. But the reed bunting in the summer sounds like this. As you can see, not the most exciting song. But again, you'll sit up there and do that for hours on end. That's obviously near some reserve with a lot of other black-headed gulls and things in the background. Just one interesting thing, I'm often asked about pesticides versus organic farms and things like that. We know that they love oilseed rape to nest in. We're still on reed bunting. And a farm up on Humberside actually monitored where all their nests they had quite a lot on. And wherever the oilseed rape was where all the reed buntings nested. And so as the oilseed rape rotated around the farm, they just followed it around the farm. Didn't matter what field it was in, that's where they all were. Now the problem is they can be 3 brooded. Number 1 brood fine, second brood fine, but the 3rd brood is often quite late. And what happens, there's 2 ways of harvesting oilseed rape. One is you can go and spray it off, and you kill it so it's all evenly killed. Or you can swath it, where you chop it off at the bottom. What he found, and this was a farmer did this research, when you cut it off at the bottom, you jolted the whole plant, and all the nests, or usually young chicks, all fell out the nest. So that 3rd brood was useless. However, if you went and sprayed it with a sprayer, with one of these horrible herbicides to kill all the plant off, they were fine. They all fledged and went off. So there's one example where actually a pesticide can help you conserve a species, which I just find quite interesting. So yeah, it's even though you're not by wetland, it's always worth checking out oilseed rape for nesting reed bunting. Now then, a bird that is in big trouble. Wiltshire is probably its stronghold. Again, they're quite like open areas, a bit like grey partridge. Is the corn bunting. You say a little brown job, but actually they're quite pretty. They've got nice streaks down the front. Great big heavy bill for the size of it, which tells you that it's going to munch grain for a living. So it loves cereal and millet and things like that. And always be slightly suspicious of the male if he looks a bit dull. He probably makes up for it another thing. He actually has more than one wife out there. He generally, a bit like a cock pheasant, will have a harem of hens. So will he. So he'll sit up on top of a post, might be top of a shrub, and he'll sing the song I'm going to sing you in a minute, show you in a minute. It's meant to resemble, and again, it does a little bit, it's meant to resemble keys jangling. again, it's quite good to hang songs on something so that it helps you remember them. But again, a very, very badly declining. One of the reasons they're declining so badly is that they're very late nesters. They're probably the last bird to go down on eggs. They're probably laying in June, and they're not fully incubating them till the end of June, which is terribly late. And as harvests have got quicker and quicker and earlier, these guys have very often got chicks. They nest on the ground, chicks within a crop, and you combine. They may survive you combining them over the top, but of course then all the rooks and jackdaws come down to feed on the grain or leather jackets, and if they find a nice nest full of young corn buntings, thanks very much, that's a nice lunch. So they're not doing very well. So we set up refuges out in the middle of fields for them, and that does quite well. Does that sound like jangling keys a bit? So that's just the male doing that. We know again how to do those mixes, these refuges out in the middle of fields for them. But again, it's no good looking around woodland. They're very much birds of the open. So much so that he'll sit on a bush and sing, but there's no way she will choose to nest, even next door to a little bush. If it's a fence line, little bush this high, she'll avoid nesting next to it because she thinks something might perch on it. Fence lines they'll put up with, but nothing much bigger than a fence post. It's quite interesting. Chaffinch. Now these are doing very well. We can do, they're not in decline or anything else, but it's a good bird to learn about. They will be multi-nesting. If they lose eggs, they'll just turn around and nest again. That's probably one of the reasons they do quite well. But again, they need seed and everything at this time of the year. That's the male. Lovely slate blue top of the head, lovely pinky breast, very attractive birds. And you will have these in your garden. And on a warm day, even now, they'll start to sing. You've probably all heard that. And what I always say is, if you're going to try and learn bird songs, it's great. Don't buy a CD, stick it in the thing, sit back and listen to 50, because you'll get to the end and you think, I can't remember any of those. A CD or something can be quite helpful, and you can go on places like RSPB website and they'll have a bird with the call. Start with the ones you know, and you will all know some. You all know a wood pigeon cooing away, you probably know blackbird or a robin, you all know some already, okay, carrion crow. Add on to those and start with the ones that you hear every day, and it's a good time. Is that the? No, that's all right. It'll turn itself off.
Oh, bird.
Unless it's spotted heating water. So yeah, start with those and listen to them day and test yourself every time you go. It's a good time because from now on, warm days, everything starts to sing, and just go, okay, what is that? And once you've learnt it and you've learnt those few that you hear every day, then you can start to add a few more on. But only add a few on at each time, and then slowly you'll remember them and you can build them up. I mean, I learned these calls when I was a kid, probably sitting with a gun in a hide waiting for pigeons to come in. But that's where I learnt them all, and it was just you have the time when you were young. I think and also you absorbed stuff when you were a kid. So it's more difficult for us to do, but it's certainly not impossible. And it's just practice. Keep testing yourself all the time.
Can I ask you about the
Yeah.
chaffinch a minute? We've got a little place in Normandy, and the chaffinch's song there is quite different. It's got a longer, slower ending to it.
Yeah.
Do they migrate at all? Do you get that mixed in here, or is there a local call that they...
You get dialects within birds, very much so, and chaffinch is the one. You actually get dialects even in this country between areas. So, you can tell if you come from Norfolk or Wales or whatever. So it's similar to those. And actually, sometimes it's quite subtle. I think if you go abroad, I agree. If you go down into France or Spain, they sing in a slightly different... You can tell it's a chaffinch, but it's slightly different to here. But actually, if you play them through a sonogram, you can actually... All the ones around here will have the same. and then if you go and pick one from Gloucestershire, that it looks slightly different. And we learnt this with corn buntings as well. There's some work going on corn buntings in the southwest. There's one little colony left on the North Cornish coast, and if they go, then actually there's none in Devon and none in Somerset, and you've got to be up into Wiltshire before you find the next lot. So we're quite concerned about this, and they were talking about joining them up. And what we found is that all the corn buntings in Cornwall merge together in winter. Okay, but then when they separate to go back to breeding sites, and there's a few of those, they all have the same dialect in the same breeding site, and they're different. So all the lot that sing in this way will go there, and all the lot that sing this way will go there. So if we link them together, we're not actually sure. I don't know. Would you marry a Yorkshireman? I hope there aren't any in here. But you know what I mean. So it's quite interesting. So dialect is quite an interesting thing, and it's obviously they learn the song, but you also learn off parents, and you pick up that accent the same as we do. So here's goldfinch, doing very well and really coming into gardens a lot now. If you're feeding little seed out of hoppers, chances are jump back. Very bubbly, very quick, very excited, very high pitched. And males and females are similar. There is a difference, but the red goes back further on the male. And then you've got greenfinch, which again they've dipped a bit. They actually get some diseases, and actually it's a really important thing when you're feeding in gardens and things to keep those hoppers clean. And also if you're doing supplementary feeding of pheasants or whatever, and you're putting out barrels, keep moving them. Keep moving hoppers onto fresh ground, because if a diseased bird comes in to feed, whether it's in your garden or out in the countryside, and all the others are coming in, it's a good way of spreading disease. So keep moving them. And greenfinches seem to be very susceptible, so they had quite a big dip through some of these diseased foods that they're picking up. But actually they're coming back again. And they have a lovely call, and the thing to listen for is the wheeze that they do. They do this lovely sort of wheeze, and you'll hear it. Sorry. Hear that whee? It's very distinctive. Nothing else does that, so that's a good. And sometimes the males will fly around almost like a big bat, and they go all sort of, and they'll fly around singing like this, and it's him claiming his territory and showing off to the girls down below. Then this is a lovely little farmland bird, the linnet. It's sort of not done very well in the past, but it's now reasonably stable, we think, and it's got this lovely sort of blusher on its front. It gets a bit more of a red up on the top as it comes into full breeding season. But they are classic birds of wasteland stubbles and weedy areas and that sort of thing, and eating small seeds. So if you grow small seed like oilseed rape or any of the brassica seeds, you'll get linnets coming, and they tend to be in big flocks, big bouncy flocks. So perhaps this afternoon, if we go down on the set-aside areas and things, we might see those. But a really nice little bird, and they love to nest in tall hedges. So when you manage your hedges, have some short for species like yellowhammer, grey partridge to nest next door to, and then you have your taller species, your taller hedges for things like bullfinch and turtle dove if they're really big, but also things like linnet. They also love little isolated bits. If we have a beetle bank running across a field, and you allow a bit of bramble bush to grow up to the sort of height of me, you'll invariably get a linnet nesting in the top of it. They like to. They're quite like gorse too to nest in, so little gorse patches they will go and nest in. But a lovely little bird, and they're a little bit similar to the goldfinch, but another little jittery call. So, some of the things you can do, I was talking to Matt and he was saying about grassland farms, and I know a lot of you perhaps don't have arable. I think birds struggle much more on grassland farms, the seed eaters do. If we go there and you've got some short turf onto pasture at the moment, especially if it's permanent unploughed pasture, then you tend to get things like redwings and species like that, and I'll come to them in a minute. But these seed eaters that I've just been covering have a hard time on grassland. Some of the things you can do is leave a little bit of the grass, perhaps if you're doing, I don't know, if you cut a hay cut or something like that, you might just leave a section uncut so that seed actually is allowed to seed. And that, certainly yellowhammers and reed bunting will quite happily eat grass seed. So if you leave a little bit of it uncut for them, that's great. I said to him again, one of the things we always want to do is actually get the plough out. And you may be all grassland, but if you get access to be able to plant these wild bird mixes in, or to just get some cultivation so you get, a little bit of arable, even if it's just a strip down the side of a field. And we were saying that it may be classified as permanent pasture. So therefore, DEFRA don't want you to get a plough out. But actually, if it isn't flower rich, or it's not archaeologically important, nice, ridge and furrow, you can actually go to them and say, look, I want to take out a strip and put in a wild bird seed mixture. And actually they're quite hard pushed to say no, especially if you've got someone, an ecologist, who's looked at it and said, look, it's not flower rich. Because actually that rule about not ploughing up permanent pasture or grass that's been down for so long is largely put in to stop all these grasses in Eastern Bloc countries that are gorgeous, flower-rich, amazing meadows, all being cultivated to grow wheat. So that's why it's largely brought in. Now, as long as we don't suddenly have a lot of grass, so that suddenly our grass is dropping and we haven't got enough of it, but at the moment we've got enough, then you should be allowed to do some of these things. And Matt and I were saying these are the sorts of things that post-Brexit we want to try and change if we can, just to make it a bit more flexible. We don't want to get rid of permanent pasture, it's lovely, but sometimes for farmland birds you need a bit of other things put in them, and ideally something like growing a wild bird seed mixture on all grassland farms can be really dramatic. You really pull a lot of birds in because they've got so little feed. Okay. The other thing you can do is spreading seed, and I mentioned this hungry gap. We can feed birds quite happily on a lot of farms up until about the end of the year, Christmas end of the year. But then January, February, March and into April we have this period called the hungry gap. So the stubbles have begun to run out, the bird seed mixtures are not providing as much. So we've actually got this now option which we did a lot of research on, and we got it into the scheme, was this supplementary feeding. So you can feed through hoppers. I'll show you a hopper in a minute. But this is a chap called Matt, who's up in the Marlborough Downs. This is an old bird seed mix, now run out really. Notice right by the farm. And he goes out and flings a mixture of small seeds, oilseed rape, probably from the farm, uncoated. They've kept a bit of grain, and they add a bit of millet into it. And you can get paid to do this. And he flings it out in here. Well, I'll tell you, if you go, it's a real joy if you go out there. I mean, literally, he can have 50 corn buntings, over 100 tree sparrows, huge numbers of yellowhammers, and you walk out and they all fly up, and on a nice day they're literally coating the hedges. And it was that actually persuaded DEFRA. We'd done the work, and we then took Jim Pace, as he was then minister, good man actually, really understood farming. We took him to a place in Northamptonshire and where he saw this on the most beautiful day, and it just convinced him. And he went back and told his civil servants, this is going in. So it was a great bit of work. We had all the data to back it up as well. So you can actually change things. And this was farmers doing this. This is, researchers looking at it, but the farmers were doing it. So it's really excellent. So you can do that, but also you can also combine hoppers. These hoppers, I wouldn't, the nozzle that you choose is quite important. This is a flat-based one, so small birds can sit on it and peck. We tend to just use wheat through this, so it tends to be yellowhammers, grey partridge. Obviously, you're going to get pheasants and things coming along as well. But we put the weld mesh round, which stops the bee bird, the badgers coming along. Leave the spikes around the top, because otherwise badgers will climb up and over the top. But as they say on Dad's Army, if you leave the spikes, they don't like it up them, so they won't climb over the top. But also we put the mesh round some of it, so the small birds can still get through. And actually, depending on what size you use, you can even restrict pheasants and allow grey partridge through, or go on down and actually stop all game birds using it and just small birds using it. So you can actually, state what you like. But even if you just use weld mesh, things like rooks really go, "Ooh, I don't think I want to go in there, it looks like a trap." So you can deplete the number of rooks, corvids in general, but also things like pigeons. They eventually get used to it. But that's quite a good technique. And also deer, increasingly. Do you have deer here?
Yeah.
So I know you've got them in the park, but deer will go and knock those over, and so we've got all sorts of things coming at it. So the beauty also is that you push it into the ground, okay? And then I said about disease, you can pull it up, just move it to the other end of the table, push it in again, okay? And if you start to get rats around these, what you can use is, you need a certificate now, but you use the block baits, put them down the holes and just heel in the sole on the top, and then move that 50 yards away, meters, and stick it back in. And the rats then will eat the block bait underground, okay? Go back a day or two later, and if any holes are reopened, put some more block bait down there and heel it in again, and then they shouldn't open up. The beauty of that is you're killing the rats underground, so that the kites and all these other things that are knocking around, we avoid the secondary poisoning. And actually, this time of year, it's a very good way to control rats out in the countryside, because we will attract them if we're growing food for birds. So therefore, it's quite important, I think, that we control rats, because otherwise, we get all the birds to survive over winter, but so do the rats. And then come the breeding season, the rats go and munch all the eggs up, because they love eggs. Take it from me, they can be a real nuisance. So I think we're obliged, if we're going to do this supplementary feeding, to take a look at rats. Okay, just quickly, we've got a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes left. I just want to do some of the other little brown jobs, but to cover some of the nice little songbirds, if you like. Dunnock, very common. Some of you might call it a hedge sparrow, but you shouldn't. It's not a hedge sparrow, it's not a sparrow, it's got a little tiny thin beak, a dunnock. And actually, when you look at them, lovely grey on them, they're a fantastic little bird, and actually their nests are brilliant. If you ever find a nest, their eggs are sky blue. Really beautiful little nest. And their song, I think, it's a little bit weak, but it's nice. Again, you can hear it around all your gardens. It'll be here. So it's a nice little bird, and you will all have it. Another little bird that you'll find, perhaps if you're walking across stubbles or even permanent pasture, is the meadow pipit. And actually, it's like a little mini thrush, really. Really quite streaked at the front, but it's quite a pretty bird. A lot of them will leave us, and they will go up onto the heathlands and up onto higher ground to actually breed. You do get some remaining on the downs and sort of open, taller places, but they might be here over winter. Might be in the park. You can come across them. And what you do is, when they fly up, it may look like a little brown job, but they always call out. And the call to listen for, if we disturb, we might well see them on this afternoon, is this. Oh, beg your pardon. Ignore that. That's the, hold on. I got two here. This is when you flush them in the winter. This is what they'll do. I bet you actually probably recognise that. Little brown bird gets up, and as it flies off, just 2 or 3, that's all it does. Just do that once more. Very high pitched. And that immediately tells you don't need the binoculars, it tells you it's a meadow pipit. I've forgotten to put this in. This is what they sound like in the summer. If you happen to be on the South Downs, you might see some, but certainly if you go up to Scotland or the Pennines or anywhere like that, you hear this all the time. Really long. And they'll often do it in flight, parachuting down. So they go up quite high and then they parachute down as they sing. So it's a great sound.
Do they hang round in flocks or singly? Or
In the winter here, in flocks very often. say that, and this afternoon we'll go out and see one. So, you do get them. You get them in singles.
Yeah.
We were doing. Jessica, who works with me, we were doing a bird survey the other day, and we flushed just one. But very often, if you come across some, there, quite a few get up out of the field. That weedy stubble I showed was perfect for them. Then you all know the good old skylark. Most of these are my pictures. That one isn't. I still need to get a good skylark picture. I'm working on it. But they are great. They've got the crest that goes up, which you can see quite a lot in the summer and the breeding season, and they will sit on posts like that and sing. They don't always have to be up in the sky. They go up very, very high and sing for ages up there. But there's a lovely classical farmland song. Declined by about 60%, and it's largely due to block cropping and winter cropping. When we talked about that, had to move away from spring crops. They like to nest in open spring crops. Where if you've got wall-to-wall winter wheat, then we need to put in skylark plots, and I'll show you one of those in a minute. But this is what they sound like. Never quite sure where they take a breath. It just goes on and on. And that's very often, way up in the top. Lovely song. Really classic part of our sounds. This is what you can do for them. Lapwing plots. Skylark plots. So all it is it's a mist-drill plot. Okay? If you like, you turn the drill off, or you can go back and spray a chunk out. And the reason is that as the crops all grow up, it gets too tall for them and they won't go in and nest in it. If you do this, then so it's a bit of bare soil. What they do is they use that as a landing strip. It's that one isn't, but they're meant to be sort of 3 by 3 meters, and they'll land in that and then walk into the side and nest. Okay, that's brilliant that they do that. They land on it and walk into the crop. What we were very worried, this is RSPB, we were very worried when the RSPB came out with those that they were going to actually use that plot to nest in. Because any carrion crow worth its salt would soon work out that every plot's got a nest in it. But luckily, they all ran into the side and then actually nest in the crop. Also notice that we don't put them, for the farmers amongst you, we don't put them in the tram line run. There's sort of tram lines all the way along. The tram lines are where the tractor actually runs along for the non-farmers. And the predators will run up and down tram lines. So we offset it, so when you're not doing a drilling bin with tram lines in, that's where you put your plot in, okay? And right out in the middle of the field. And that way you get far less predation. If you put these near the edge, they're much more likely to get predated by badgers or weasels or whatever. So out in the middle of the fields, and they do use them, and you can keep them on breeding. Quite interestingly, talking about nesting in and attracting predators, one of the things we tell all our student scientists that come and work for us, because the next species I'm going to show you is lapwing, is that you never ever walk out and put a white cane to mark the nest. The lapwing won't mind and come on down, but a carrion crow, they're very intelligent, the whole corvid family are very intelligent. They will soon learn that each cane's got breakfast underneath it, and you'll get severe predation. Even the way you walk out there, if you walk straight out, find the nest, put a little heat sensor under it, which is what we're doing with lapwings, turn around and walk straight back out again, the carrion crow sitting on top of the dead tree up there will think, what did he go out there for? So as soon as you go on, they'll glide down and find the nest and it's predated. So what we tend to do is we roughly find it through binocs, we go out, put a little heat sensor under the eggs, it just tells us if it gets predated, was it at night or was it in the daytime? That's really what it's telling us. And then we'll walk on out the other way. We'll take a different route out. So actually all we've done is had a wander around the field, and then they don't get that. they just think we've been wandering around the field. So they're very intelligent birds. And of course one of, I think, farmers' all-time favourite birds is the good old lapwing. People say they're black and white. Oh, the hell. Look at these colours. Fantastic. Lovely sort of, don't know how you call it, sort of russety amber, sort of rusty coloured under here. And then on here, this is, I think if you look it up, a word to describe it, teal have it and mallard have it on their wings. Depends which way you're going into the sun or the light. Pavonine, it's a great word. That's pavonine. And so really beautiful. And then of course the great big crest underneath, just fabulous birds. but we're losing them big time from the south of England. If you go in the north of England, Scotland, not doing too badly, but the bottom half of this country, they're doing really badly. And as I said, we do think predation is one issue. But, you know, if we lose this sound, it's just too much. Isn't that great? I'll play it again. And the whole time the male is doing that while flying. And they'll go up high and then they'll do that call and they come down at such a rate and their wings go, they're doing it. If you get close enough, you can actually hear the wings doing it. And they're flying around displaying over the females. Just a fabulous sound. What we can do for those is, it's like a big skylark plot. That's actually a hectare, 2.5 acres out in the middle of the field. Now again, you can get them, they'll nest on pastures, especially if it's got bits of tussock, so you've had some cattle on it and you've trodden it down on water meadows and things. But you need a few tussocks and then some sort of bits where they've grazed it down. So it's a bit, you know, the sward is quite up and down and uneven. And they'll come in and nest in there. But as I say, we do think that one of the issues is predation. So it's no good bringing all these birds in, and then if you know, onto these plots on arable ground or even onto small bits of pasture, if they're just going to get eaten by foxes. And we do think that's one of the issues. But we're working on that, and until we know what we're really talking about, then we don't publish it. Once we really have got the facts and figures to show what you know, what's the problem, then we'll do it. Because we know that there's some places that have all the stewardship schemes in, a lot of money being spent, and it's attracting all the lapwings in, and yet they're a rapidly declining population. And we just think, knock a few corvids off, knock a few carrion crows, keep the fox numbers down, and we're turning them around. And we're beginning to show that that absolutely works. Sorry, next one. Just the difference between these two, mistle thrush and song thrush. Again, you're going to have both here. They particularly like pasture. That's where we're going to see them today, if we see them. And the song thrush on the left is the most common one, and they very often go up and they're singing now. If the sun came out this afternoon, they'd start singing, and so is the mistle thrush. They're much smaller. The mistle thrush is probably nearly half as big again, and the song thrush likes these slightly wetter farms, so you know, you're probably doing quite well around here for them, because they tend to be eating slugs, snails and earthworms. They're the big diet. But the songs are quite different. With the song thrush, they keep repeating phrases. So if you hear a bird that keeps, if you listen to this, they'll pick something and they'll say it 3 or 4 times, and then there's a pause, and then they'll pick something else. Not all the time, but quite a lot of it. See how they're picking the phrases repeated 2 or 3 times. Lovely birds. And then we have the, I might stop him and do this one. Sure. Try this one now. Oh, I've got them both going now. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me just cancel that one. Stop. There we are. This is mistle thrush. That wasn't a mistle thrush. It's quite rich. It's really nice. The other thing about them is that travels a long way away. You literally 2-3 fields away, you really carries. And notice also that here, these are spots all the way down. Their spots turn into flecks, into lines. It's just a little difference if you're looking through binoculars. Fabulous bird. We might try and hopefully you might hear one. The other thing about them is that the country name is stormcock, because sometimes if you get a thunderstorm fairly early in the season, sort of April, May time, they will go right up onto the top of a tree, and it's almost like they're trying to out-sing the thunderstorm. So it can be raining and blowing a hoolie and thunder and lightning, and they're up there singing. It's quite interesting. So stormcock is one of their country names. Two birds that hopefully we'll see this afternoon are the redwing and the fieldfare. And these guys breed in Scandinavia and right up into Russia and everywhere else. And they overwinter with us. And this is one of the reasons we leave our hedgerows uncut to produce lots of berries. The redwing here, a bit like a song thrush, but look at that great big eye piece. Fantastic streak right through the eye, and which the song thrush doesn't have. You can see there. And the other thing, see the bit of red under the armpit here? Just see a little bit of it. And if they ever lift up the arm, which they do very often when they're feeding on berries, they're flapping around trying to get berries. And that's very noticeable, that red underneath. So a really lovely bird, and actually strikingly lovely if you get them in good light and close up, they're really, really beautiful. Love them. And this is the fieldfare, bigger, chunkier bird, probably a third bigger than the redwing, but very different. Grey head, these lovely sort of V's as a plumage down on the front, and then brown back and a grey bit on the back of the tail too. So at a very quick glance, sometimes if you're scanning a field and they're out, they can almost look like a pigeon, a small pigeon, but once you get to see them, you see they're a thrush. And they're lovely, and you'll recognise their call, because they very often call when they're flying. I ran a course the other day and we went round and we didn't actually see many birds. We saw a few, we saw enough to get by. I then jumped in the car, I drove about a quarter mile down the road, and there was some sheep on some stubble turnips all grazing. And there must have been, I'm really not joking, 200 or 300 redwing and about 100 fieldfare, all in amongst the sheep feeding. And I nearly drove back to go and get them all. They'd all left, it would have been a great, just fantastic scene. So, the redwing, it's just a very simple call, but once you've learned it, it makes you look up and it identifies it. You also can hear it at night, especially early in the year. October time, let the dogs out for their final pee before bedtime, and you hear them. Pitch darkness flying over the top, and it's just it's a simple little sort of. I know it's not a lot to go on. There we go. That's all it is. The fieldfare. Still got a redwing going. And you can get a flock of them flying over doing this chattering and chuckling, and it just makes you look up and it identifies them. Moving on, we've got starling. Now, if you're down in the West Country or Wales, some of the farmers don't like starlings too much because they're still very common down there. But as a child, I remember them just masses coming over, and they're not around. Fantastic birds. I love them. I used to find nests when I was 8 or 9, and when the biology teacher came to teach us, then he had a ringing license, and so after the class I'd take him round, and we rung a starling, baby starling, in the roof of the school. We had to take a few tiles off to get at them. Anyway, we rung these, and about a year later he came, and someone had found the starling with a ring on just outside Moscow. And I remember getting the map out and just thinking, this was one of the most amazing things. It was one of the things that I've always loved starlings since, and they're great. And they're great mimics. I used to live where one did a trim phone. Do you remember the old trim phones? And it just did it, and it literally had everybody in the village going to pick the phone up. It's just fantastic. So by the sea, you can hear them doing curlew and red shank and all sorts of things come into the call. song, love it. They're a fabulous bird. Talk of lots about them, but I haven't got time. Quick one between the crows. Everybody says, "Oh God, I know they're a corvid, but how do you tell the difference?" The carrion crow here. Basically, look at the beak, great big beak, feathers all the way down to the end. Okay, and black as you can see. Move to the rook, and they've got this white skin all around the top. Okay, the feathers don't go all the way down to the beak. You've got a white skin patch. Also, they look like they're wearing shorts. They've got the feathers go all the way right down to the knee, whereas they don't on those. And actually, it's quite obvious when you can see them. And their calls are very different. The one you'll know them both, but. They always sound angry. And then the rook is just that really agricultural whir, So again, you know it. You already know. And they nearly always mess around rooks in winter with jackdaws. Okay, and jackdaws are actually. I used to have a pet jackdaw when I was young. Used to get me in all sorts of trouble. When I played cricket, I used to whistle and it came in and sat on my shoulder, on my head. And when I went out to play cricket, it used to come and visit me, and I'd go, "No, go away, I'm in the middle of a cricket match." And once it flew around my head, and I was telling it to go away, and the only place it could land was on my stumps, and it landed on the stumps and not the bail. And everybody stood there, and then some wag from the outfield went, "How's that?" And the poor umpire had no idea whether to give me out. So cricket matches, I had to go and lock it up. But look, lovely blue eyes, and this great big grey head. The great characters, and all very intelligent. And they're meant to shout Jack, hence jackdaw. So again, we should see those this afternoon. But they're great when you get them in the hand. They're a lot more pretty than you think they are as a corvid. So just very quickly, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, this is the package that we know that if we can get together, okay, albeit on an arable land, we've also got them for all grassland packages, and it isn't as extensive. As I say, without getting a plough out, it's not expensive. But if you, on a grassland farm, if you leave some areas uncut, grass, you do supplementary feeding, you allow your hedges to grow, so you've got lots of berries, and then also think about around the farmyard. It might well be that you can do some supplementary feeding around there and that sort of thing. So there is quite a lot. And also, if you've got short turf, then don't forget your feeding birds like song thrush, redwing, fieldfare. They'll all be feeding at the moment on earthworms and things out there too. So you can actually do quite a lot. Those are some of the things you can do on farmland, and that's all part of what we can target. And if you get that amount per 100 hectares, we think that will turn around bird numbers. And again, it's back to this group of farming. If everybody's doing it, then you can have an impact. If only one of you is doing it in a large area, the impact is watered down. So again, it's back to this. Think about your birds all year round. That's quite important. And on the big Farmland bird count, are you all aware of this? This is a GWCT thing we're trying to get farmers to do. It's only half an hour of your time. Okay. Last year we had about 940 farmers or keepers sent in their counts. The press love it. We want to try and beat 1,000 this year. And we also want to try and get groups doing it, where these facilitated groups, if everybody's doing it, that sends a good strong message to government. We had this paper that came out saying about how everything's declining, especially on farmland, and it just sends a great message when farmers actually go out and count their birds. Send them in to us, and we will shout on your behalf. And the press love it; they pick it up a lot, and it's a good news story. So do it yourself. Take binoculars, a little pad. Pencil's quite good because if it starts to rain, it will run. Encourage others to do it. The more the merrier. Make sure you send your records in. The number of people who do it and then just don't do it. You can do it online. I'll give you the link in a minute. Yeah, I'm a bit proud about it. Go down and tell the people in the pub, you know, oh, it's out bird zone today and we saw 20 species or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just nice to see that you're doing it. Also, the fact that the farmers amongst you are doing things for birds, but you're busy people, so you don't tend to get out there and go and look at what the results are, and that's an important part of it. And yeah, we will shout on your behalf. We've got PR people that will send it all out. There's this word jizz in farmland, in birding terms, and it's really how a bird acts. It's not the distinctive features really, that's eye stripes, or are they on the ground, are they singing from a tree. It all helps you identify the bird. What size is it? Compare it with a blackbird or a sparrow. So when you get back, you can look it up in the book. The flight, is it a green woodpecker flies like this, great big undulating flight. A starling is like an arrow through the air, they're very different. But also, if they're on the ground, are they hopping? Or are they shuffling along like a little dunnock shuffles? So it all helps you ID them. And then are they in a flock or are they singular? That might help. And then we've just done some of the calls and the songs, and we'll hear some of those this afternoon. It all helps you identify them. And make your little notes. If you're not sure you identify it, write it down. But if you can't, go back. And very often it helps you ID it once you get back. And then this bird count. It's between the 3rd and the 5th. I'm going to hand some of these sheets round, afterwards. These are last year's, so they have the dates on the bottom, which are last year's dates. So if you can do it between the 3rd and the 12th, ignore these. But these were just left over, so I thought I'd bring them along for you to help yourselves. Between the 3rd and the 12th, about 30 minutes, and you just literally pick a couple of hectares, 5 acres. Somewhere where you think you might have a few birds, and just go down and spend half an hour and jot down the birds you see, And if you only see 5, it doesn't matter. If you come across and there's lots, that's great. If you're unsure, probably better not to write them down, And download the sheet from the website. If you just remember GWCT, right? GWCT, and if you put then Big Farmland Bird Count, and it takes you straight to it. But that's the link. I'll leave that up there for you a bit.
We'll send the link round to everybody.
Okay, yeah. And at the bottom of it is also, if you can tick the box to say that you're part of a farmer cluster group, that's great, because we're trying to get everybody within these farmer groups to do their counts. And then that sends a good message to government. They think, right, gosh, we're getting a really big turnout. People are doing it. This is working. And that's then going to encourage them to do more funding. And don't forget to send them in. That really, really is important. We've also got this survey tool, and again, it's all on that web page that you can go. And so actually, you can fill it in online, but also over the years, if you continue to do it, it'll begin to show you how you're doing. Compare it with last year and the year before, whatever. Also comparing with the national average. Oh gosh, I've got far more red wing than anyone else, or I haven't got as many of these. So it's just an interactive tool that you can use if you're sort of IT savvy. And it's, as I say, it's all on that page. You can go on the different links. But as I say, 940 last year. We've got to get over 1,000, because again, that's a great headline. 1,000 farmers or land managers, or whatever you want to call it, go out and count their birds. That's fantastic. And for once, we're getting good news. And most of all, enjoy it. Once you're out there with a pair of binoculars, out in the countryside, spending half an hour, it's good fun. Enjoy it. That's me done. So what we're going to do now is, I think, hopefully, lunch. Yeah. Yeah, if you half an hour, if you're done in half an hour, if you want a bit longer, but roughly half an hour. And then I think the key thing is to lots of layers, and some wellies or walking boots. And I think so. If we say in about half an hour, we'll meet out by the car park. Is that with a